And yeah, we are live. So welcome everyone. This is this is I guess episode 1 of ChatGDG. What ChatGDG is a new format where we live stream and we talk about the tech industry, the state of the industry, and the community side of things. And then will be having guests. And guess what? The first guest is a very good friend of mine. We've been working together for 3 years ish, right?
Yeah,
About 3 years, right? When we
yeah.
were back at Gamesys. So I'm really glad to introduce Gabriel Michaels, Gab, as a director of engineering for Choco. Choco is a very interesting company, right? Is a unicorn, which is something. So I'm so curious to ask Gab a couple of questions. I'm curious to hear his side of things, right? Because I think that you might have one of two things to say to us. So, without further ado, Gab, welcome. How are you?
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting. It's not only your first ChatGDG episode, it's actually my very first podcast in this format and this style and whatsoever. So
And
I'm
that's make the two of us. It's pretty new for me as well. So we are learning. We are learning as we
exactly.
go.
So I'm glad to do it with you as well. And yeah, like as you introduced me, my name is Gabriel Michaels, or everyone just calls me Gab around here. I'm the director of engineering at Choco for one of our domains, the buyer's domain. And yeah, I work at Choco, and we aim to reform the food industry to transition them to like more sustainable food systems and aim to reduce food waste through making the businesses more efficient, basically on the different sides of the food industry. Basically, that's the quick pitch. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, actually. So it's just a very good cause, right?
Sorry, it's just a.
It's a very good cause to fight for, just to have the
Oh
sustainability
yeah, yeah.
element
So,
added to the food industry. It's pretty important.
no, exactly, and I think I mean, I've worked in games and like other companies before, like games companies and television companies, and I think at Choco it was also like the very first time that I learned for myself that how important also a mission of the company can be to like drive your own personal growth and ambition, like getting behind something to do something good in the world. And I've said this actually a lot, like in interviews, and I think it's even quoted on the website. But even when we were just like 10 people or so in the very early days of Choco, I would say that this is the once in a lifetime opportunity to do something big in the world, right? And I mean, we all work in tech. It's not always that easy finding companies with good causes, really big causes as well out there that you can stand behind. So like, I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to go along this very interesting adventure of the course of like 5.5 years now. Or not,
Wow.
a bit over 5 years now. Yeah.
You say something quite cool. When we were 10 people, how many people are you now in Choco?
So we're around 400 people now,
Okay.
right?
So that's
So
been a little bit of a growth, I see,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And I started off as employee number 2, basically. Back then, in the early days, you join as an engineer, and like I always say, full stack engineer, because you get thrown into
Yeah.
everything that comes your way, right? And over the course of time, engineering also started to pick up and grow. So like when we say 400 people, that is across different countries in the meantime. So we're in the
Mhm.
US, we're in Spain, we're in France, the UK, as well as our main market, Germany. So our headquarters is here in Berlin. And engineering itself is around like 100 people now, right?
Okay.
But like also a very interesting phase to grow, or like to be in a hyper growth startup, just a very rapidly growing startup as we are, just because in the past 5 years we've all seen what kind of challenges companies needed to deal with, right? And I'm glad that overall to have experienced the learnings and grow with the company and see how to handle them, right?
That's an invaluable experience. So my very original question now it is, yeah, what was the biggest challenge? Okay, two questions. So similar. What was the biggest challenge that you had to face as an individual? So you are a director of engineering now, but you join as an engineer. I know that you've done a really uh, small time as an engineering manager, and then you moved up to the director of engineering. So what was the biggest challenge for you at individual level, and what do you think that there was the biggest challenge for the company at company level throughout this hyper growth phase?
Mm-hmm. I think for me personally, as you mentioned, like maybe a bit of a backstory here to how I actually went down to explore the managerial path at Choco, right? So after a year's time at the company, actually, like we were still quite small in engineering. We were like 4 or 5 people at that point, whereas the rest of the business, the operational side, really picked up, and we were like, I don't know, 30, 40 people on that side. So eventually hiring needed to pick up on our side. And there were other different responsibilities that were popping up that someone needed to focus on. And at that point in time, that was like a year in, I pitched to become and like own all of these open topics and become eventually the first engineering manager. I had no prior leadership experience before that, at least professional leadership experience. But I thought that like with my characteristics, that it would be something that would be very interesting for me to explore and go down that route and eventually explore that path. And speaking of exploring that path, I think that was probably in the early days, the biggest challenge for myself was actually knowing what engineering management was and like what leadership on a professional level is, right? So when going down the path of engineering management, I actually didn't know before I found the role myself that like there is this role of engineering management. I haven't been at a company prior that had this kind of structure, which had engineering managers in place. So I bumped into it because we were looking for a head of engineering back in the day, and I looked at the job description. I thought like, hey, wait a second, it seems like something that I potentially could do, right? But hey, I have no prior experience, so maybe what is the path of going to head of engineering? So then I bumped into engineering management as like the prior step to it, and this is how I then pitched it to my CTO back then, and got the trust to like pick up that role. So then in that position, I had to learn like what it meant to be a people leader, what it meant to manage engineering back then team, all right, or engineers in general, and had to explore kind of like what are my priorities right now, like what does the role entail. And since I was the only person focused on this role, I had no one to really help me going down this path. So what I did then was to just go outside, go to conferences, speak to different people, like connect with people on LinkedIn. And sometimes I would even just randomly ask for advice and connect with people and jump onto phone calls to explore different areas that I had no idea about, right? So I think in the early days was just like knowing what the role entails was the biggest challenge. And then ongoingly, with the growth of the company, evolving as well. We're a fast-paced company, so I had to also evolve continuously to fulfill the expectations of of this role in the end, right? So I think those, and it still is, right? Like we're continuing to grow. In the meantime, I've gotten the trust to be a director for one of our domains, and it's still like we're growing, and the expectations are continuously getting added on top or changing. So I have to also like grow with myself, like expect myself to consciously be outside of my comfort zone to learn and grow overall. So I think that was the biggest step. In the early days, there was a moment where I even thought like, hey, this is a lot about relationship building, which, you know, it's not only about that, obviously. But yeah, just exploring it by myself. And yeah, to your second point, what was the biggest challenge for the company, or what are like the biggest challenges for the company? And I think the first big one obviously was COVID itself, right? So I think especially in the food space, being in the food space, operate like working closely with restaurants and
Very good
vendors,
point. Yeah.
right? It was just from one day to the other, if you recall, back in March or April 2020, when all of a sudden all the lockdowns across Europe happened, right? And then from one day to the other, you like saw the ordering in the app, right? So what basically Choco right now does is to simplify the ordering process of restaurants to order their supply with their vendors, right? So when back in the day, restaurants would call and speak on the answering machines, and someone else on the other end would listen to it and type it into machines, we created kind of like a chat-based application to simplify the ordering process and eliminate all the ordering errors that happen during the order process, right? So when looking at the application back then and the orders going through, like 90% like went downhill, and like from one day to the other, right?
Wow.
And we had a big sales team on the ground back then, like walking into the restaurants and also, you know, trying to grow our customer base. And all of a sudden you had to pull them back in, and you know, couldn't do sales as well. So what do you do? And then additionally, we were always kind of like a very office relationship connection heavy company, so we all went to remote, obviously. And I think that phase was very much focused around making bold decisions in the company. And when I speak a bit about being bold, it was not like leaning back looking what happens, but like trying to also see what is in our hands to push forward, to drive the business forward, right? And like over the course of COVID, like it just continued growing, and luckily growing, even though like everything crashed down 9%, but still businesses were picking up and figured out their way how to order through COVID. So like it was going growing in that phase. We went to countries where basically the lockdowns didn't happen, and found projects for the sales teams to then pick up internally that like you couldn't do in the real job. So like people from sales would assist with projects on different sides of the business, may it be people operations or finance or other things. We even like started a new project like Choco Market during that phase to help vendors get their products out the door and sell them, because one of the problems in that space was restaurants might have been closed and like the supermarkets were empty, if you recall, right? But
Yeah.
actually the vendors actually had their warehouses full. They just didn't have the channels to sell their products. So we helped them sell their products, right? So there were different ways how we dealt with the challenge of COVID. And like in the end of the day, like it really paid off for us to like be bold and not like sit back and like let the government assist us with salaries. We also did not do any layoffs or whatsoever. We
Oh,
really
nice. Okay.
we really focused on yeah, a healthy state of the business, so to say.
That's a very good point. So my biggest takeaway from all of that is like we should be proactive, right? Because there is nothing that we can do about COVID. It's completely out of our control. It just happened. So we should be proactive and we should try to make the most out of an unfortunate, situation. So really, well done to you and to your company for
I have
doing that.
one thing like that I want to add on top, and this is something that learned from my dearest CEO, Daniel Kashab, who always states to make decisions out of hope rather than out of fear. Right.
Okay.
So we all often encounter these moments
Yeah.
in any way. And so like it always helps to like fall back, like what are we trying to get out of this? Right. Like what is our hope then? Being fearful about like the change and like who knows what's happening in 3 months from now. Right. So that helps a lot when I say about being bold.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So going quickly back 1 second to the first point, because I found myself quite a few similarities with your story because I've done pretty much a similar thing, so to speak, maybe just a few years later. So I found out, and tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, probably the engineering manager is one of the roles, if not the role that is, I'm not saying controversial, but you are not sure what to expect from an engineering manager at the Times, at Booking.com, at Virgin, at Google. You know what I mean? Is one of those roles where you really you really have no clue what to expect. We probably all of us, all the technical people that are listening to us, they will probably know roughly what to expect from a senior dev, right? Senior and engineer leading a project, leading a team, having that confidence. Okay, engineering manager, I think is an interesting point because for some company an engineering manager is really a tech lead with a few people to look after. So there are some company that demands engineering manager to be coding 30, 40, 50% of their time, which is not a trivial ask, or at least in my book. In other companies, engineering managers are they pretty much have the role that agile project managers do in other companies. So in some companies, for example, in this is as far as I know in booking.com, so people feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the engineering they don't have dedicated agile project managers. So the engineering managers they do the delivery work, so the project management kind of side of things, as well as managing people. At the Times, for example, we do something even slightly different because I am the only engineering manager for now because we have a little bit of a unique, let's say, structure there. So I, for example, I'm not only not part of the day by day, delivery, but I'm also not even doing the project management kind of stuff. So I really, being the only one, I cover pretty much, everything, like all the training, hiring, all the people side. So we've got like 6, 7 people. I will probably be ramping up to about 9, 10 by the end of the year. So I'm
Nine.
doing direct,
Okay.
reports. Yeah, the 9, 10 direct, and then a few skip levels. So that's pretty much it. So that's interesting. I found that quite interesting. I found interesting that this role can be, can have multiple facets, if that makes sense. So, and then the following question would be, what do engineering managers do at Choco? So, what are the expectations from an EM?
Yeah. So first, to your point as well, I think every company is unique to their setup and their needs. And that's why an engineering manager at company A has probably a different setup or a different set of responsibilities and expectations than maybe in company B. right? That's why you find also like, and then like also depends on the team sizes as well, right? And how you split your, you know, how many hats do you eventually want to wear, right? And this is eventually how it grew at Choco as well, from the the very beginning. Like also like another controversial, not controversial, but like another similar role, is for instance the tech lead itself,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
like many companies have a setup where like there's an engineer manager and a tech lead. That's like for instance with us the case. And like how do they split then responsibilities
Hmm.
as well, right? And so going back to your question and how we are set up. So uh, basically our teams, our product teams are set up, um, and led by what we call trinities eventually. So that consists of an engineering manager, the product manager, and the product designer. And they have
Yeah.
their different set of responsibilities of leading the team eventually. Now, since a year, we have also the role of a tech lead, which came into play. Now, how did that come into play, right? So in the early days when we started with engineering management, uh, fun fact, they were actually called tech leads in the early days in Choco, even though they had or people
There
responsibilities.
is actually, I just got to know this since just a few months. Apparently, there is an actual role which is called uh, TLM, Tech
Tech lead,
Lead
yeah,
Manager,
yeah,
and
yeah.
those are people that usually take on two, three, four people. They clearly don't have a massive, direct number of direct, reports, but they can't because they need to spend quite, I think, significant amount of time just to keep an eye of how the coding situation is, try to maybe create a roadmap for the next 3 to 6 months. So it's very busy on that point of view, right? And that context switch, that's another thing that I think is quite important, especially in those roles that are a little bit hybrid, if that makes sense. So very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the early days when we had these introduced, the back then tech lead, but like eventually engineering manager role, the engineering managers actually had three different hats to wear, which was
Mm.
they took on the people management role, which entailed, I don't know, 8 to 10 to 12 reports or something inside of their team. So all the engineers would report into them within their teams. Then they took on the role as a tech lead to eventually drive the initiatives forward, make sure that like the solutions that they're planning out are scalable. On top of that, then being needed as coders within the team, right? So actually pushing tickets like along, right? Like any other person as well.
So they were part of the team in the sense of velocity and all of that. So they were okay, they were considered effectively team
Mhm.
members. Okay.
Yeah. And so obviously, to everyone out there,
It's intense.
it's intense and not feasible. So at that stage, we started off with, okay, let's remove first of all the coding aspect of it, and then like we backfilled the role of the individual contribution that was expected from the engineering manager back then with an actual engineer, right? So that's then how the role evolved, and then with 8 to 10 reports, and like some teams maybe even more, right? Like so it's a fairly large team size that we have in terms of our teams. Also the technical deep dives into the initiatives, plus all the people management responsibilities of growing all the people, of having one-on-ones, stakeholder management of all the initiatives, and coordinating with the different teams was not really possible to put under one hood, which is when we then decide to bring in this new role of a tech lead who is supposed to collaborate very closely with the engineering manager, but without the reports, and like really going into the details and
Exactly.
like
Right?
how
Yes.
how to scale things, right? Plan things, writing tech design documents that like and signing them off. Whereas then the engineering manager is still responsible for the outcome of the engineering outputs, so to say, and the outcomes. But like more on the level of like, also ensuring the health of the systems and like understanding on a high level, being able to contribute. So they are still technical and expected to be technical with us. They're supposed to be able to challenge and question things inside of the tech design documents, but more on a high level. Eventually, the decision making is up to the tech leads, right? So now the engineering managers can focus solely on like staffing the teams,
Yeah.
right? Coordinating the initiatives with different teams, talking to the product managers
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
pitch like,
Stakeholder management also is pretty
yeah,
important. Yeah.
exactly, right. And so the technical part is limited to more a high level understanding of like what is the team trying to achieve, and our systems healthy, and what do we need in terms of staffing and people and skills for the mid to long term, basically.
Yeah, I mean, hiring is a big one. Hiring takes a lot of time. You know what I mean? So you definitely want to have a dedicated person for that, because you just can't, juggle hiring and organize training, and managing people is intense. It's beautiful. I love doing it, but I think one of the misconceptions here might be, yeah, you manage, I don't know, let's say eight people. Okay, cool. It's gonna take you, couple of hours per week. No, it's much more than that, right? Because especially I think if you want to at least try to do that right, you really need to give people your time, and not just the 30 minutes weekly 101. Yeah, that's of course that is part of the thing, but of course
Baseline, that's
that's the
baseline.
baseline. You need to prep a little bit this meeting. You need to debrief a little bit this meeting, right? You need to try to think, okay, that person maybe needs some help, some upskill in terms of, I don't know, AWS. Okay, can I, get that person to a AWS course for 3 weeks or something like that? So it takes time. It takes time. It's intense. It's not a trivial. I've got 5 spare minutes. Yeah, let me manage people. That is not gonna work. And especially what I found out that if you give your time to people, people are really grateful, right? So when you spend time trying to think, how can I genuinely help that person in terms of career growth? How can I make that person a better, engineer? That's pretty cool, but it takes time, and yeah, and I think that has to be the number one priority for engineering manager. Then we can discuss whether is expected to code or not, is expected to do a little bit of project management or not. That's fine, but I think the number one duty for any given EM is to properly manage people, and not just 5 minutes job. No, it's much more than that.
Yeah, and like the individual is then on the one side, so you need to spend time with the person. If you have like a 30-minute session, then oftentimes it ends up in a quick check-in. 30 minutes go by really fast, right? And
Yeah.
I spoke a bit about like building relationships with individuals, and like you have to like also invest into like really understanding who is the person that you're talking to, and like who, and helping them through everything that they're going through, right? And eventually what that translates into, right, is zooming a bit further out, is like the dynamics within the team itself, right? So like not only when we talk about people is an individual the case, but like then looking at holistically the team
Yep.
health perspective, and like have I built the right feedback culture, or like do I have the right psychological safety in place, that like everything comes to the table. All these kind of things like take time to build up within the team, right? So if you want to build a high performing team, right? So, and this takes time, and like if you have additional responsibilities on top with larger size teams, right? Like some people might argue 8 people, yeah, 8 direct reports are already a lot. You know, I know many people also say like 6 is like kind of a sweet spot, but
Actually, there wasn't the like a kind of rule that maybe I might have heard from either Google or someone else. The 7 plus minus 2.
yeah,
No,
maybe it
that
works.
was a way of doing
Yeah,
things. So
rather -2, yeah, but
yeah,
yeah,
but I mean, that depends, because if your focus is that, you can take a little bit more load. But I appreciate that beyond 10, 12 is not feasible.
yeah.
But if you really, if you double down on that, I can still see 8 to 10 people you can manage.
Mhm.
But of course, you can't do that if you also are expected to code and to build roadmaps and to, because
Yeah.
that is a different job. I mean, to be
And
honest.
that's where the time goes into, right? Like, so if you find more capacity, it's not like, okay,
Hmm.
what do I do now? I should start coding, but like eventually it's also like your responsibility as an engineering manager to look further ahead, right? You don't need like 1 2 years in advance, but you should know where you're heading towards in like 6 months from now, right? Like
Mm.
what tech debt do we want to pay off? Like how are systems constructed? Um, and what do we need to in a couple of months from now need to address, and like how do I address it with the product manager as well, right? And to clarify the importance of these kind of things. So like building out like the strategy and vision on the engineering side is also your responsibility, right? And of course, in this case, you will need the collaboration with the tech lead, but like eventually your role is then like laying it out, putting it on paper, and also talking to different stakeholders to in various teams, but also within your team to then make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, totally. So we've talked a little bit about engineering managers. Now, the question that I have for you is like, okay, I don't remember, like 2 years back or something, you made the jump to director. It was like about 2 years
Right.
ago or
3 years.
three.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, what's the difference now? So now you're director of engineering. What do you do? What's the deal? What are the differences from when you were an EM? I know that you've been an EM for a short period of time, but probably you might have found a couple of differences.
Yeah, and I'd say also my role as an engineering manager was never really classic engineering management. It was not like I had a specific team scope and I
Mhm.
owned that. I was always, even back then, more on the organizational side of things.
Yeah,
And
pretty
this is,
much what I'm doing here. I think is pretty similar
yeah.
of what I'm doing here at the times. Yeah.
Exactly, and like I think the difference is like this depends also like a bit on the setup and the size of the organization as well, and like what investments are they trying to make. But eventually, I expect an engineering manager on at least for us, like an engineering manager itself owns a very specific team scope, right? So they manage the dimension of like, I don't know, a certain objective to, I don't know, typically onboarding, right? Like that might be a scope of a team to own and develop that further, manage one team, right? And as time progresses, you grow in terms of your scope and the size of the scope that you're capable of addressing. So you might not only be able of like taking one team along, like only manage the onboarding team, but you actually found capacity to drive impact beyond your team, right? To then actually look at maybe your whole domain, like the
Mhm.
neighboring teams in the domain, and lead initiatives on that level, right? So this is how the engineering manager evolves into like more senior engineering manager, right? So you
Yeah, yeah,
need
yeah.
to carve
Okay.
out space and time to drive higher impact or initiatives within the organization, which go usually beyond the team, right? And then, yeah,
No, sorry, because I've got a question now.
yeah,
So in
sure,
your current structure,
yeah.
so do you have both engineering managers, senior engineering managers, and then the you as a director? So
Mhm.
the senior EMs are pretty much manager of managers because they manage the EM or not. How
That's
does it
actually
work?
that's very interesting that you bring this up because yes, in terms of level,
Hmm.
we have it in our career path,
Yeah,
so to say, right? Like for us, a senior engineering manager could be anything, kind of like a head of, uh,
exactly. That
right?
often the SEM maps to the head of engineering, especially here
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
UK, whilst the director is always a little bit the next step usually.
Exactly. So, and we just revamped in a way also our engineering management competencies as well to incorporate also for the current challenges of the industry, which is the economic situation, right? So, like, how
Yeah, fun times.
fun times, exactly. So like we want like, and like usually what career paths do out there is to incorporate the scale into the career path. So you have to manage managers or you have to have multiple teams underneath you, but like what if you don't grow as an organization, or what if like that possibility is not there? How do you still become like a senior engineering manager, right? And so what we did is to take things like managing managers or having multiple teams and list them as indicators, right? So you might be mentoring and another engineering manager of a different team, but you might not be actually managing that person, right? So it incorporates for these signals, right? But eventually, what we still expect from a senior EM is to then be capable of managing multiple complexities, right?
All
And
right.
not only your own team, right? And then when you go onto the director level,
Mm.
and I was a director before even like Vikas or CTO joined, so like it was always more on the whole organizational engineering organizational level. So my task would be more on a high level, setting up how do we do hiring in the first place, right? Or how do we structure our teams, right? Like those kind of decisions that impact like all the different teams are more the things that I spend my day to day to now. Like right now, actually, I'm heavily involved in hiring again, um, and so and like also like working closely with a product director of product, for instance, to set the roadmap and see what tasks and what do we want to do and then foreseeable future, right? And bring that to the team. So like I now like understand the strategy and like foresee like, okay, these are potentially topics that we want to pick up soon, so we better start talking about these now and talk to different stakeholders like user research or design to like bring these things a bit closer to the team, so that when the time comes and they need to pick it up, right, they already are kind of prepared, and it's not like dropping a bomb on them like, okay, you have to do this now in the next half year or quarter, but they
Mm.
have already a sense of it. So it's like bringing the business perspective even more closer to, and strategy closer to the teams.
Interesting. So, do you have the last word about any technical, decision? So let's imagine. I don't know. I'm not familiar with your structure. I would imagine you've got tech leads, maybe principal and engineers for something like that. So let's imagine I'm a principal engineer, so pretty, pretty high level in terms of IC. For some reason, I uh, advise that we should go in that direction, whatever that is, maybe to try to embrace a new framework or something. Do you have the last say? So if for some reason you are very opinionated that that is not gonna be the right choice for Choco, who's gonna win, the principal engineer or the director of engineering?
So I like to think that, you hire people that are better than you to also make these kind of decisions and trust them with these kind of the decisions, right? So if the principal architect says and lays out his reasoning for going a certain path and it has a very understandable business value behind it, and strong business impact, who am I to go against it? But like still, like, you know, if it is a huge change, if it means a huge change for the organization, and like all the different domains that we have, this is then something that is being discussed
Hmm.
um, within senior engineering leadership as well. And like
Yeah.
we have a very recent example within the organization, which is we actually decided to go from native mobile development to Flutter, right? And
we
so
are we are doing the opposite, not Flutter, but we years back we used React Native, which is still is is part of some of our repo, and we a few years back we decide to go native. So we've got an Android team, an iOS team, and we are taking from there. It's quite interesting. It's just a cycle, pretty much. I think that every company goes, through the shall we go native? Yes, and maybe after a few years they try to go React Native or Flutter or one of the other solutions, and maybe in a few years' time they will get back to native. It's just a you know just a cycle. It's a
if you
catch
have
22 situation.
if you have another hour, we can like go deeper into that conversation. No,
Well, actually, take this as a pin because we
yeah,
can talk about that maybe next time. This can be a
yeah.
great topic for next time.
Yeah. So I'll just briefly touch on it in terms
Mhm.
of like decision making, right? So in this
Yeah.
example, like our architect like laid out his reasoning for his findings and like backing it up with different resources, why it makes sense for our business, and right, and that's why like there are multiple businesses where you will find people going to native or going or vice versa, right? So everyone has their reasoning and it makes sense, but like for us in this particular topic, it made for everyone sense. Okay, um, this decision to move to cross-platform, not even Flutter yet, right? So we said like,
Wow. Okay.
okay, we will go cross-platform. It makes sense, right? For us, like a big factor was also like spreading the knowledge, breaking the silos of knowledge, not like iOS, Android, even like uh,
Yeah.
right, TypeScript and all these kind of
Yeah.
things, so that like people can pick up more holistically. So that was the background of like going cross platform. And then we took that decision and brought it to the teams and said like, look, we're going down this path, and we set up a task force to then um, of multiple people and multiple functions as well, to evaluate what would be the best cross platform to go for, so that like we also create the buy-in from within the organization to go down this path as well, right? So like this was driven by the architect, and then like we found like we had the discussions around the decision itself, and then we moved forward pretty fast as well, right? So I think the decision was done in like 2 weeks or something, yeah, and executed.
Wow. For such a big, the decision, 2 weeks are really a short time, actually. So, I mean, well done. So, better, yeah, try to, I think, um, yeah, try to go for that rather than overthinking. Of course, I think that you've valued pretty well your trade-off. Of clearly, there will be some pros and some cons.
Sure.
So one of the pros, as you mentioned, clearly, if, for example, if you use, React is pretty, popular library for web, and you happen to use React Native for the mobile part, clearly you can almost hire the same people, right? Because it's not that different. So it's going to be a much easier learning curve, especially if maybe you are a small company, right? It's much easier to hire a React/React Native or even a React engineer that just need to get upskill to React Native. Whilst if you've got native, if you go native, you've got Android people and iOS people and web people, which is a little bit more fragmented, but clearly is much more, powerful in terms of you have full, control of what you're doing, so you can maybe leverage that a little bit more. And so, yeah, trade-off. So there, I truly believe that there is not a right or wrong answer. I often hear from people that maybe have, opinions on that. They say, ah, no, React Native is crap, or maybe why you should go, native if you've got tools such as a Flutter or React Native. So, everyone has his own opinion. So
Yeah,
it's
and
cool that it's working well for you now.
exactly. And Vikas, our CTO, he would say technology is a means to an end, right? So
Mm, mm.
um, every business has to find their business reasoning behind it, what makes sense for them in terms of their priorities, right? And so for us, it just made absolute sense to go down that path. And like also, we like to move fast and not let decisions linger. So that's why
Yeah.
um, that was an important factor for us as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important to try to be lean, try to, try something. Maybe it's not gonna work. Okay. I mean, fair, but at least we tried, rather than discussing for weeks and months and maybe not even action that. You know what I mean? So I think it's pretty important to just do things.
Mhm.
And then you would learn from your mistakes and you would get better, and
Mhm.
you would iterate on
Mhm.
on that. I think that's probably the right way of doing things. So what's next for you then? Is there, an end goal? Are you planning an ambush to your CTO? What's the deal there?
No, I think I still have the feeling that I'm still constantly out of my comfort zone, right? Like in a positive way, one person, a coach, once said to me, right? Like I said, like, oh, I have this slight imposter syndrome, right? Like it's been bothering me this week, and it was like, you've got imposter? Congratulations, that's amazing, right?
Nice.
That only means that like you expect yourself to
Exactly.
do more, and you expect yourself to grow. And so that's something that stuck with me, and like I still have the feeling that like I have to grow a lot, right? And especially we are, yeah, as I said, 100 people. It's still still a rather small organization, I would say, right? um, and seeing how this scales, we're in a phase where the scopes of teams are getting a bit larger, and you want to see how to make this more efficient, like in the near future as well, right? Like in terms of like growth of the organization, and like size and the dynamics of
Yeah.
like communication with each other in teams, right? I think this is like the ongoing challenge. I would say the first organizational challenge for me is like, how do I structure teams? And it, until now, it's still a topic, right? In terms of
It's
like,
always a topic. It would never end.
it
Never,
will never
ever.
end.
The
Exactly.
the
Right.
perfect team does not exist, or
Yeah.
maybe, that team can exist for a very short amount of time, because then priority changed, people change, and the perfect team is not perfect anymore, right? So it's a
Yeah.
constantly evolving, iterating. Yeah,
Exactly. And I think like over the course of the year, I mean, I'm 3 years director now, but like there were always like year after year new things that I found that like I need to focus on, or like I carved out some time and to then identify, okay, I need to spend more time on this, or spend more time on this, as like the systems grow and become more sophisticated, and structures also
yeah.
become more sophisticated, like with the new tech lead role, right? With the introduction of domains like buyer, vendor, platform,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm,
Like
mm, mm.
dynamics change, and you like pick up new kind of topics that you need to drive and align with across the organization. All of these topics like are constantly evolving, and like force in a good way to like go outside of my comfort zone and to learn and expose myself to new ideas, right? Like yeah, and there's a lot of content out there to help me, and a lot of people as well, and I'm grateful for that.
You say the very important word, coach, at some point. This is probably a topic for another time, because it's such important, such big topic. getting a coach, a mentor is so important. People
Mhm.
really underestimate that. And I'm not meaning just a coach, for your day-to-day job, but just a coach in general can really help you. So
Yes.
that's very important. Probably we will touch upon that maybe next time. Can be a really cool, topic. So I've got the last quick question for you, and then I'm gonna ask you what you are up to in the following weeks because I know
Mhm.
that you've got a couple of things going on. So
Yeah.
the last question is I'm going to give you my definition. Is very simple, probably oversimplified, but I think it's interesting about what an high performing team is, or how do a high performing team looks like. So from my point of view, very simple. An high performing team is a happy team, so people that really enjoy working together and they know what's the vision, so they know what they're working on, why they're working on that, and all of that. So that's my very super simple, super simplified definition of a high performing team, because I've read, out there is, everything, and and else. So what's your definition of an high performing team?
So I like the analogy to, like many people say, like, oh, we're a family. Like, I don't like that definition. And I rather see it similar, like to how Netflix does it, like to a sports team, right? Because in the end of the day, like, if you are not performing, then like you get benched. So like the expectation is that like you constantly drive yourself and grow and drive the business forward, right? And like you're constantly evaluated
Yeah.
against it, right? And like um I think one of our investors in a recent call, he jumped into our all hands, Dan Rose, and he also had this thing where he said, like, every 6 months you have to like kind of imagine you're reapplying, right? Would I still get the
Huh.
job, right? And I think like that's
Interesting.
right, and like I think that's a fair point, right? Like don't get comfortable, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to push, like, but all of this comes together to what you're saying, right? Like so we were, we all as leadership in Choco, we recently read the book Legacy from James Kerr, which speaks about the values of the probably highest performing team on earth, which is the All Blacks, the rugby team,
Oh my
right?
god, yeah.
Right? And so they speak in terms of their kind of characteristics and what they expect from each other and like what defines them, right? And so like it all comes down to like what you were saying, like having the purpose, but like also like having the ownership, like the
Yeah.
responsibility of making decisions, right? Continuously learning, right? Like the like seeing pressure like as a gift and being able to like manage pressure as well, right? Like so how do I handle my own emotions, right? Like do I stay calm, right? Do I having the right expectations, always training against like win conditions, right? That like you always
Mm.
like applying that also like to your day-to-day business, but being authentic, all of these kind of things, right, lead all up to a high performing team, right? Like if someone does something that you expect better from, then someone else would like say like, hey, I expect more from you. And I think it's super important to have this, like that every person inside of the team challenges themselves to like go out of the comfort zone constantly, right? And be able to like manage those expectations in a way, but like also being able to like have the feedback culture within the team to do so, right? And I think like every company in the world or like probably can still do better in certain aspects when it comes down to these topics, right? But eventually you want to have this mentality, because this eventually will drive your not only your team but like also the company forward, right? Especially like, with the right ambition. So I think this all comes down to what a high performing team is, right?
Yeah, and also what's very important, an high performing team is a team that needs to be empowered to do that, right? Because you've touched upon a couple of interesting points. It's not just random people that they love what they're doing and they are happy and yes, fine. It's a little bit more complicated than that. There is clearly that has to come from the people. People should be, willing to to commit. Maybe they buy into the vision, something that you clearly did when you joined Choco, right? But also is the company's duty to empower this team, not to trust this team, to give the team maybe the training that they need to, to make to allow the team to be even, vocal if there's something that is not right. They should be empowered to say so without, fear, anything bad happening. So I think that the company has a major role in how to foster this high performing team culture.
Yeah, when I speak about like operating under wind conditions, it like requires people to go out and beyond. And I was speaking a bit about like taking risks and being bold, right? And like oftentimes these things don't go right, and you have to create the space where these things are celebrated, because like we've learned something new about it as well, right? Or in the future we'll do something different, and this is like the space that you create for people. Like, I trust you, like I
Yeah.
hire people that are better than me, then like I trust them also to do the work and take risks, and not everything will go right, and that's absolutely fine, and like welcome, because like it's
It's
just
life, I guess.
how to
It's
grow,
life.
right?
That's very good point. What you said, previously. Yeah, that's really important, right? When I ask you whether if maybe this very senior IC would like to go with maybe something, a different framework and all of that, I appreciate that you empower that person to take that decision. So we hire you for that. You know what I mean? So and that person should feel empowered to take on this decision. Of course, if he suggests something, I'm not saying silly, but maybe dangerous. Why don't we go with that framework which is in, beta? Maybe not. So maybe when there is something maybe potentially dangerous, I think that is the right moment for leadership to say, okay, maybe not, or maybe try to think this through a little bit more. But
Mhm.
if it's reasonable, you may or may not 100% agree on the decision, but I think it's also very important to, yeah, empower that person. Okay, if you
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
that is the right path for us, okay, let's go and see what happens.
And this is where like it comes back to the team as well, right? Like you don't have lone wolves, so like go and ride alone into the frontier and take the
Yeah.
decision without communicating, right? In the end of the day, they propose a solution which might be out of the box. Like if there are no major concerns like from the team, and everyone has the buy-in and the right mindset, like go for it, right? We got your back, right? So there's this
Yeah.
guardrail that you
Yeah,
set up.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Go there. I trust you. If you screw up, it's fine. We will learn from that mistake. And
Yeah,
the next time it will be a success.
yeah. And
That's
again, like it's not about being careless, right? Like you should still have, like, you should be bold, but you should put in the right measures
Yeah, no,
to
absolutely.
counter
That's
everything.
a given, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes people take it literally, and like they say, like, "But you told me, like, I can just go and do whatever," right? So, just being clear.
Yeah, can be excesses in both sides. Maybe people that really take it literally, as well as maybe some leadership that they say, yeah, yeah, sure, we empower people, but then there is always a filter, always a veto. So no,
Yeah.
can we do this? No. Can we try this? No. Okay. So I think like everything in life, balance.
Mhm.
If that thing is reasonable, if there aren't any major terrible, catastrophical, risks, yeah, let's go. You know what I mean? Just let's
Yeah.
try. So
Cool.
you, sorry, go ahead.
No, no. Like then I
Yeah,
guess we come to the last
I guess
point.
we are wrapping this up. So you live in Berlin, your company is in Berlin,
Exactly.
but I think in a couple of weeks, no, actually, yes, in a couple of weeks, you will be in London, right?
Mhm.
For
Exactly.
doing what?
So yes, end of the month. So actually, in 2 weeks from now,
Yep.
I will be on the Lead Dev conference, speaking. Short, quick, lightning talk, riding the roller coaster of emotions as a leader. So I'm going to give a few tips on how to handle emotions for yourself as a leader at work. And so, if any of you is out there and coming along as well, please hit me up and let's have a chat. Let's grab a coffee or whatsoever, and oh, we can discuss anything you'd like from here, or like Choco itself, um, or the topic of the conference itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So when exactly is this lead dev conference?
Yes.
Like, well, what days?
So it's on the 27th and 28th.
Right. So it's
Right.
gonna be Tuesday and Thursday and Wednesday, right?
Yes,
Tuesday and
exactly.
Wednesday. Okay.
I'm not sure like, if there's tickets still available. Please
Hmm.
take a look, but like can highly recommend the conference. There are not many places out there and conferences and spaces where engineering leadership comes together. So I very much appreciate the lead dev for
Yeah. That's a
organizing.
shame. I cannot come because I was not able to get a ticket for different reasons. So it's fine. Next year, I'm gonna I'm gonna come. For sure. Next year, I want to be there. There is lead dev also in Berlin, also in
End of
different
the year,
cities,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
So
in December. So
December.
yeah.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah, many
Let
many
me think about it.
there, high quality event for sure. So yeah, that's me, and yeah, just wanted to say thank you, Stefano, for bringing me here
No
on board.
problem, man.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah.
And if you want to know more about Choco, please visit our website, choco.com. And if you are contemplating and making a career move, we're also hiring different roles. So please check that out as well. Full stack engineers, Flutter engineers, if you know anyone.
Ooh, Flutter engineers. Nice. Okay.
So please get in touch with me or apply directly. Um, but yeah, it's for a good cause. There
Yeah.
are not many bigger things than fixing food waste in the world. So
And also there is a pretty good engineering, culture there. So people will
yes,
definitely learn, will definitely grow. So
yeah,
nice.
exactly.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Hopefully we can have another one of this before the lead dev in London. Let's see if we are able. Really would like to keep talking with Gab. There are so many topics like coaching, mentoring, all these, go native or not. It's
Mm,
very, very interesting. So hopefully we can have another one before
cool.
the end of the month. And yeah, for now, thank you so much for being here. And hopefully, yeah, that was a little bit our tryout is a little bit new for all of us. So bear with us. We will get better. Uh, Thanks everyone. And I've just dropped a bottle of water, but it's fine. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.